Hi everyone, Joseph Lavoie here. Welcome to Power Shifts. I am back home after an intense week in London, and yesterday I spent the better part on a 9-hour flight from London to Vancouver to get home. The Wi-Fi was spotty, so I ended up being offline for most of that flight. And then when I landed and pulled up my newsfeed, I saw that what the rest of the world had already seen, and that was the sight of the Trump and Vance berating Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in the Oval Office, complete with accusations of ingratitude and disrespect. Like you, I assume like you, I found this to be an extraordinary exchange, and it's one that played out before television cameras to the point where it actually looked like it was almost staged and set up by Trump and Vance. But it ultimately ended up with Zelensky departing without signing the expected minerals deal, and a planned press conference after the meeting was canceled, and Trump went to social to post that Zelensky could, quote, come back when he is ready for peace. I watched the entire exchange on video, and with every passing moment found myself honestly boiling up in a hot rage. We are barely 6 weeks into the Trump presidency, and the pace of disruption and the style in which it is done has become unbearable to watch. It's really putting me in a funk. I don't know about you. And when I renamed this Substack or this podcast Power Shifts, I did so because I'm interested in analyzing the power shifts, big and small, that are reshaping geopolitics and public affairs. This incredible exchange may be one of the clearest examples of these shifting dynamics. The exchange is incredible. And with any other U.S. president in history, it would have been unbelievable. But I don't know about you. I was certainly saddened by the fact that none of this surprised me. I am now so numb to Trump's shock and awe, reality TV-inspired approach to manufactured conflict that nothing shocks me anymore. But when we look back on this event, the writing was on the wall for several weeks, right? Trump entered his new term openly skeptical of continued blank check support to Ukraine. His administration sought to choreograph an end to U.S. support for Kiev by forcing a fast peace settlement. His key point of leverage, obviously, a surprise insistence that Ukraine repay past aid with economic concessions in the form of a vague deal for the U.S. to gain access to Ukraine's strategic mineral resources. If this isn't the definition of exploitation, I don't know what is. And this is no peace deal, right? It is a cynical play on his part to yet again secure another transaction that he can count as a win. The proposed minerals for aid agreement had few specifics about extraction or what the U.S. would give in return. It was more a political gamut than a genuine economic deal. And Zelensky's visit to Washington was hastily arranged to address this demand and attempt to salvage the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. Of course, that relationship as of today, Saturday, March 1st, looks incredibly strained. This moment, this incident, highlights just how far Trump's foreign policy deviates from past U.S. norms. Typically, American presidents have maintained a united front with allied leaders in public, even if private disagreements exist. It is virtually unheard of for a U.S. president to bicker and insult a partner nation's leader on camera. Heads of government generally do not bicker in front of the cameras, is what Counsel on Foreign Relations fellow James Lindsay told reporters yesterday. However, the depressing part of the ordeal was watching Trump side with Russia's narrative in key ways. Number one, during the tirade, Trump asserted that President Putin had, quote, gone through a hell of a lot with me, unquote, due to accusations that the Kremlin helped Trump in 2016, effectively sympathizing with Putin. In the weeks leading up to this meeting, Trump called Zelensky a dictator, parroting a Kremlin talking point. And even though he tried to walk back that remark a day before Zelensky's visit, let's be honest here, right? The damage was already done. He has also falsely accused Ukraine of starting the war and praised Putin as very smart and cunning, making clear that his administration has positioned the U.S. alongside Russia. And this is an exceptional departure from U.S. post-World War II role of staunchly backing allies against aggressors. Trump's priority, as he stated bluntly, is forcing peace talks on his terms, even if that means strong-arming Ukraine. As, quote, you're either going to make a deal or we're out, he warned Zelensky. In other words, Washington's support is conditional and it is exceptionally transactional. The realignment from the U.S. is crystal clear. Trump is moving America's stance from one of supporting Ukraine to pressuring Ukraine, even if it means Russia gets the upper hand. I have to imagine Ronald Reagan is turning in his grave right now. And none of this is shocking because it is the climax of a weeks-long campaign by the Trump-Vance team to prepare Americans for abandoning a key ally and pivoting American foreign policy in an isolationist and pro-Russia direction. So what does this mean for post-war Western alliances? Well, I think it's crystal clear now, right? America can no longer be counted on. It's tilting toward the other side. Just days before, the U.S. had sided with Russia and other hostile states in a controversial UN vote against a European-backed measure regarding Ukraine. And as Germany's opposition leader and soon-to-be Chancellor Friedrich Merz declared, Europe may be witnessing, quote, the death of NATO, unquote, as it currently exists. This is the reality that seems to have been lost in the immediate aftermath of the Oval Office exchange. Do we honestly believe Trump's America will step in and defend NATO members under Russian threat? As Rory Stewart put it yesterday, do we think there's any scenario in which Trump defends Estonia or Lithuania from Russian aggression? Of course not. not the way things are shaping up now, right? So NATO's dead. Its members need to chart a path forward without the U.S., and that will involve difficult decisions, as it means these countries need to significantly increase spending on national defense at levels that will likely require cuts to other programs and services. And we saw this already this week with Starmer's announcement, days before his visit to the Oval Office, to cut foreign aid spending to fund an increase in military spending. Some see this as pandering to Trump. I see it as the only option the UK has to shore up its own security capabilities in light of what is now becoming an increasingly unreliable Washington. And others are going to follow suit, including Canada. Chris Hayes made this point yesterday on MSNBC. Quote, today, Donald Trump irreparably destroyed the 80-year-old post-World War II international order, unquote. That may sound a bit dramatic. I don't think it's that dramatic. The winner of this rupture is Russia. Senior Kremlin figures have openly mocked Zelensky's humiliation. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev gloated on social media that Zelensky was, quote, an insolent pig, unquote, who finally got a proper slap down in the Oval Office. So Russian Kremlin officials are absolutely enjoying this moment. Russian state media have cast Trump's scolding of Zelensky as proof that the U.S.-Ukraine partnership is fracturing, reinforcing the Kremlin's narrative that Ukraine would eventually be abandoned by the West. And no doubt, Putin's government felt emboldened because if Washington is pulling back support, Moscow can seriously consider pressing its military advantage or driving a harder bargain at the negotiating table. The other winner of this rupture, of course, I think, is China, because Beijing has long advocated for a negotiated settlement to the Ukraine war on terms favorable to Russia and has positioned itself as a friend to Moscow. So Trump's quasi-alignment with Russia on Ukraine could benefit China strategically. If the U.S. pivots to Russia, China would face a divided West. An isolationist U.S. is also good for China. An America that is less interested in confronting Russia may also be less interested in confronting China's ambitions. When the U.S. retreats, Beijing gains clout. A U.S. support becomes increasingly fickle. Allies will turn to reliable partners. As the West retreats on foreign aid, and if China and Moscow step in to fill the void, it will reshape traditional alliances because soft power matters, and it appears the West is quickly giving that power away, creating a vacuum that Russia and China could try to fill. The consequences of all of this has put me in one hell of a depression on this early Saturday morning, because let's be real, the consequences are terrifying. More regional conflicts, aggressive moves by belligerent powers, the breakdown of trade and security networks that kept the world relatively stable for the last 80 years. The Oval Office incident is both a symptom and accelerator of a profound geopolitical shift. The United States, along the anchor of rules-based international system, is redefining its role, with Trump forcefully asserting a more insular, transactional policy. Allies have to recalibrate. Adversaries are optimistic. Global institutions like NATO and the UN face strains they haven't seen in decades, and the last 6 weeks have created unimaginable damage to Western norms. There are, in all of this, implications for businesses in this shifting global landscape. A retreat from the global order has the following consequences in the coming years as I see it. Number one, rising geopolitical risk and uncertainty. Companies must brace for a world where international disputes can escalate unpredictably and great power mediation is less assured. The fraying of the US-led security umbrella means higher risk of conflicts or flare-ups that can disrupt markets. For example, with the US less predictable, a regional war, whether it's in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, or East Asia, might not be contained or deterred as before. So political risk monitoring has never been more important, whether it's gauging the stability of Eastern European supply routes or assessing exposure to potential sanctions and wars. So take a look at the war in Ukraine. If Russia gains the upper hand, that could prolong instability in a region critical for agriculture, minerals, and other commodities affecting prices and availability. Second way that this all impacts businesses is more protectionism and trade barriers. The decline of the U.S. champion liberal order goes hand in hand with the rise of protectionism. American policy has already shifted towards tariffs and economic nationalism, and other nations are following suit. As U.S. influence and the old free trade ethos wane, we are seeing higher walls at the borders in and out. And of course, we're on the front lines of this here in Canada. Both Trump's and even Biden's administrations have embraced industrial policies and restrictions like export controls on tech and local content rules. And businesses should expect more trade regulations, tariffs, and government interventions in commerce worldwide. This could mean the fragmentation of global markets into regional or political blocks. So for instance, a Western tech sphere versus a China-Russia tech sphere, each with its own standards and limits. Companies that thrived on unfettered globalization will need to adapt to a patchwork of trade regimes, and that means regulatory compliance will become more complex as sanctions and export controls multiply. The third way in which all of this affects business is that we should expect shorter, more resilient supply chains. The turmoil and uncertainty encourage businesses to reconfigure supply chains for resilience. So the era of just-in-time, globe-spanning supply networks optimized for cost efficiency was predicated on stable geopolitics. And this is what Peter Zeihan has written several books on, was the degree to which sort of U.S. Security protection around the globe enabled globalization. This is all now in question. We can expect a continued trend toward shorter supply chains, bringing production closer to home or to politically friendly countries. This onshoring is already underway in critical sectors, so think semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and energy, as firms and governments worry about over-reliance on potential adversaries. So businesses operating globally will likely need to diversify their manufacturing bases and perhaps duplicate supply lines in different regions to hedge against disruption. The stability premium might trump the cost savings of far-flung production. So for example, a company that used to manufacture entirely in East Asia might establish parallel assembly in Eastern Europe or Mexico to guard against trade wars or conflicts. And this restructuring carries upfront costs, but it might be necessary insurance to allow these businesses to thrive or even just survive. Another way that this all impacts businesses is the regionalization of markets. So in a less globally integrated world, businesses may need to adopt a regional strategy. So rather than one unified global market, we could see more defined regional blocks, North America, European Union, East Asia, South Asia, with different rules and dynamics. So businesses might standardize products within each block to comply with the localized regulations of those blocks. So for instance, data storage laws or different technical standards if East-West tech decoupling continues. We could also see market entry strategies that will need to account for geopolitical alignment. So for instance, a Western firm might find it easier to expand in India or Brazil than in China or Russia due to the political climate, whereas Chinese companies might deepen ties in parts of Africa or Southeast Asia as Western presence recedes, particularly in the light of some of these foreign aid announcements. Not surprisingly, defense and cybersecurity considerations weigh in here. So with heightened geopolitical tensions, certain industries face new opportunities and challenges. The most obvious is the defense sector as nations rearm. So Europe increasing budgets, Asia Pacific allies bolstering the defense contractors and tech firms specializing in security could see increased demand. Businesses in related fields, so cybersecurity, surveillance, aerospace, may also find new markets as governments prioritize security spending. Companies must also bolster their own cybersecurity and contingency planning, as periods of geopolitical rivalry often come with increased cyber attacks and espionage. And we're talking about here state-backed hacking of corporate secrets, for example. So the geopolitical fragmentation can also lead to something called splinter nets and tech bifurcation, meaning tech companies may have to align with one standard or another and deal with more government scrutiny. So we are heading into a world of increased and fractionalized regulation across all these different regional markets and blocks. And then finally, let's have a quick chat about climate and energy transition impacts. So interestingly, the breakdown of cooperation could slow global efforts on issues like climate change, which of course in turn has implications for many industries. If great power coordination falters, global climate action may too, so potentially leading to a more fragmented or unilateral approach. So carbon tariffs, local content rules for renewables, energy markets, as a result, are already geopolitically charged. For example, Europe scrambling for non-Russian gas in the face of conflict. So more conflict, we're going to see a lot more of this type of scrambling. Businesses in energy and transportation are going to have to navigate a world where energy security is paramount, and this could both accelerate renewable investment in some places for energy independence, but it could also prolong fossil fuel use in others as old alliances shift. So, for example, Europe's push for renewable energy and alternative suppliers intensified after feeling the pinch of dependence on Russian gas. So, you've heard me say this countless times. Businesses must become more agile and more politically aware. The post-Cold War assumption that geopolitics were increasingly irrelevant to business has been upended. We no longer have that level of security. We don't have the security blanket that allows us to take a passive approach to geopolitics. C-suites and boards need to integrate geopolitical risk into core decision-making. I think that, in fact, has to drive so much decision-making now. It cannot be an afterthought. And some key strategies include diversifying supply and markets, enhancing real-time risk intelligence, engaging in policy dialogue. So corporations may lobby for stable trade arrangements or clarity on sanctions, and building redundancy and flexibility into operations. So there we are. I'm trying to turn the last 24 to 40 hours into something that we can work with, something practical. Make no mistake about this. Seeing this type of behavior in the Oval Office has been one hell of a depressant for me. I cannot believe this is the America that the world is dealing with. But hopefully we can all make some sense of this and turn it around and apply some practical solutions to all of our own businesses. And there we are. I hope you enjoyed that. You can read the full article at powershifts.pro, which is where I have my Substack. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this podcast and don't be afraid to leave some comments on the Substack.